back to part 4 of Fringe Radio for Saturday night, the 6th of December. I hope everybody's having a great weekend. We're going to be right back with Larry in just a minute. I want to do a quick shout-out. My good friend Bill in Arizona has been tuned into us. Bill and I started out in the amateur radio, ham radio hobby years ago, and used to hang out when we were kids and teenagers and kind of lost track of each other and kind of recoupled up here. And Bill, if you're still listening, I just want to say hello to you. And glad to hear that you're tuning into the program. Of course, we're here every Saturday night from 6 till 10 Mountain Standard Time. You can hear us on Global 24 and the International Shortwave Broadcast Band at 93.95 kilohertz. We're on k-talk.com, the Listen Live link, Inception Radio Network, and, of course, at good old AM 630 KTKK here in Sandy, Salt Lake City. You can find Fringe Radio on the web at fringeradioshow.com. We're on Facebook and Twitter as well. Again, next week on the program, Heidi Hollis will be with us for the first 2 hours. The third hour, we will have Jonathan on. Going to be talking about the old Poseidon adventure movie and the old disaster movies from the early 70s. And then Mr. Vamet will be with us talking about a lawyer's perspective of life or death, or maybe consciousness after death. Something more out there. So we've got a great show lined up. Also, real quick, just one more time, we really need to help kids at this time of the year, children at this time of the year. There's so many in need. K-Talk is doing their Christmas drive again. Looking for brand new unwrapped toys for elementary school age children, wrapping paper, children's coats, clothes would be great. You can bring the stuff over here to the studio. We've got a huge box out front. The studio is located at 10348 South Redwood Road in South Jordan, Utah. Please help these kids out. Every year, all the listeners step up and do something for the kids. Want to make their Christmas as merry as possible. Okay, let's get rolling again. Larry, again, our guest tonight, Larry Holcombe. Larry, thank you so much for giving up your Saturday night and being here with us again.
No problem at all. And you mentioned a couple of things that brought up some thoughts that if I can jump in and say something right quick.
Go ahead.
You mentioned you were a ham radio operator.
40 years.
And going back to Roswell, I don't know if you know it or if it's well known or not, but Jesse Marcel, who was the chief intelligence officer of the 509th, that went out to the debris field at the Roswell, the Foster Ranch, 70 miles outside of Roswell, and looked at this debris field, which the Air Force says was a crash weather balloon. Then it says, no, it was a secret Project Mogul. They all use radio equipment. Well, as a ham operator, I know my uncle was a ham radio operator. I still remember his call sign, W4AIV, in Nineveh, Virginia. Don't know why I remember that, but that was many years ago. But as a ham radio operator, you're very, very familiar with radio equipment. You have to be. And I remember going down into his basement, and the walls were lined with consoles of radio equipment that went up to the ceiling. All vacuum tubes, and there weren't any transistors back then. And so Jesse Marcel went out to the debris field and said he saw nothing out there that even resembled anything that he knew about. Well, if it was a mogul balloon, it would be radio equipment that used vacuum tubes plugged into circuit boards and what have you. Also, he was well schooled in radar reflectors, which they used Ray-1 radar reflectors with the mogul project. He was schooled in that. He would have known those immediately. So I wanted to throw that out. The second thing is in Salt Lake. Before I forget it, I happen to think that you live probably within 70, 80 miles of where the real stuff is. I think it's a dugway. I think Area 51 is a diversion, and I believe I stated it in my novel, and I say it again in my book that's coming out, that I think that the artifacts, any extraterrestrial artifacts, are probably at Dugway, and rather than Area 51. I could be wrong, but I believe that Dugway is. I think Dugway is probably as secure, if not more secure, than Area 51, and is certainly more remote. So anyway, I just want to throw those thoughts out.
No, exactly. And you know, I don't know. I don't want to go out on a limb here because I'm not a Dugway expert. They talk about the runways out at Groom Lake at Area 51. My understanding from what I've read and a little bit of research that I've done, Dugway has runways 3 times that size.
That's exactly right. They do.
And it's kind of been kept pretty quiet. Of course, it's 2 valleys over from the Salt Lake Valley. You've got the Tooele Valley. It's on the other side of that. It is interesting. I've had the opportunity to kind of scout around in that area. All those it's all fenced in. Whoever the contractor that got the fencing contract for that job is a very wealthy individual. The fence actually runs up over the tops of the mountains and stuff with signs right up at the tops of the peaks. It's absolutely amazing. You know, there's a reason they don't want you crossing over the fence.
Well, before I took early retirement, I was military sales manager for a company out of Chicago, and just before I retired, I was due to go to Dugway because I was working with the Navy, and they were building a Navy lodge, which I was involved with at Dugway, and I was due to go there and probably spend the night there, and I was looking forward to it, but there was something that came up and it didn't materialize, so I retired before I got a chance to go to Dugway, but doggone it, I was sure looking forward to it.
Yeah, and there's not, from my understanding, there's not much, you know, at least at Groom Lake, there's photos and there's buildings, you know, quite a little community out there. My understanding is that most of Dugway is all underground. There isn't much that's above ground. It's all underneath.
Yeah, who knows? The government is people say the government can't keep secrets. That's true about political secrets. Our government can't keep political secrets. But when it comes to defense and national security, oh yeah, they can keep secrets. They're very good at it.
Can we talk a little bit about the Colorado project?
Okay. Well, let's see. I'm trying to think of how the Colorado project actually came about. It was, let me go back and look at some of my notes here. The Colorado project obviously was the Air Force, and I was trying to get the lead into why the Air Force actually did this. You had Donald Kehoe at the time was hammering on the Air Force, and you had Dr. James E. McDonald, brilliant atmospheric physicist from the University of Arizona, a real hero of mine, and I think many in ufology. And they were hammering away at the Air Force to have congressional hearings and what have you. But one thing led to another, and the Air Force said, "Okay, let's go out and hire a university to do an independent, unbiased study of the UFO issue." So that happened, and the Air Force went out and tried to offer a number of universities a $500,000 contract to do a study on UFOs, and they couldn't find anybody to take it. I think they went to MIT. I know they went to Northwestern, which was Dr. J. Allen Hynek's university. They wouldn't take it. I think they went to the University of North Carolina. They didn't want anything to do with it. Finally, the University of Colorado, who was cash-strapped at the time, said, yeah, we'll take it on. And they turned it over to Dr. Edward U. Condon. Well, the problem is Condon didn't like the subject. He didn't like UFOs. He didn't like the whole subject. As he said privately, he thought it was damn foolishness. And but anyway, they took the thing on. A lot of controversy. He had people working for him for 2 years, studying UFO cases. People that disagreed with him, he fired. He became, I really think he almost became unbalanced toward the end of it. He called J. Allen Hynek a kook. Anyway, at the end of it, the Colorado Project issued their findings, which was in 2 parts. Condon wrote 2 parts, which was two summaries of the Colorado Project's findings, which was almost 180 degrees in disagreement with what his own scientists had found. And I forget who it was, perhaps, anyway, one scientist said it was the most biased report of a study that they'd ever seen, the most unscientific and biased report of a study they'd ever seen. So the Colorado Project turned out to be a farce. But the long and short of it was the Air Force was turning back flips. They were happy.
Right.
Condon said, in essence, it's nothing to this UFO business. It's nothing but something prosaic, and you really don't need to study it anymore. So the Air Force shut down Project Blue Book, which wasn't any big loss because Project Blue Book by that time wasn't anything but a propaganda machine. But the interesting sidelight to it is, the Condon report came out, I think it started in 66 or 67, and the report was wrapped up in 69, and Condon issued his report. The news media bought it, and end of story. The funny thing, which I find extremely amusing, is that when Condon issued his report, right up the road at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, the Air Force Academy was teaching a class called Introductory Space Science. They had a textbook called Introductory Space Science, Volume 2, Department of Physics, United States Air Force. And we can't go into it in detail, but the chapter 33 was entitled Unidentified Flying Objects. And in the conclusion, let me see if I can find that here so that I can quote it. In part of the conclusion, it says, this leaves us with the unpleasant possibility of alien visitors to our planet, or at least of alien-controlled UFOs. However, the data are not well correlated, and what questionable data there are suggests the existence of at least 3 and maybe 4 different groups of aliens, possibly at different stages of development. This, too, is difficult to accept. It implies the existence of intelligent life on a majority of the planets in our solar system, or a surprisingly strong interest in Earth by members of all other solar systems. Now, it's funny and yet it's sad.
Yeah.
Here's Condon collecting $500,000 by saying UFOs are nothing but fool's folly, or in his words, damn foolishness, when the Air Force Academy right up the road is saying there could be as many as 4 species of alien life visiting Earth.
Right.
A
major contradiction.
Yes, it really breaks me up. But anyway, so that's I guess hopefully a thumbnail of the Condon report, which is pretty well known as pure propaganda.
Very good. Yeah, yeah. It's so much. They've created a sea of reports and documents, and it seems in some cases, Larry, the right hand isn't talking with the left hand.
Oh, there's a tremendous, from the period of 1947 to the 1960s, up until Blue Book was done away with when the Condon report came in, there was great dissension within the Air Force. There was, on one side, there were the non-believers, and they were the ones that had done no research. On the other hand, it was the people that were involved deeply into research into the UFO subject, headed up by General Cabell, who thought that they were legitimate and probably extraterrestrial. Yeah. And there was a great deal of infighting within the Air Force, which is when I did research on the book, I found this really very surprising, the amount of infighting going on within the Air Force itself between these two factions, and the ones that had done the research were the believers. The ones that hadn't done the research, it's just like the debunkers today. They've done very little research, but yet they try to come up with all sort of prosaic reasons why about what UFOs are, and some of them are stranger than the possibility that they may be extraterrestrial.
Can we talk a little bit about, I know I'm kind of shearing away a little bit from some of the talking points, but could we talk a little bit about the thoughts on the Kennedy assassination and UFOs and UFO disclosure, and Nixon and his relationship with Jackie Gleason? I've come across this a couple of times about Nixon allowing Jackie Gleason to see some things.
Well, that's I cover that in the book. Gleason's ex-wife, Beverly McKittrick Gleason, I believe was her name, was going to write a book about Gleason, and she said that that Nixon did take Gleason, and there's numerous variations on this story that he did take him to see remains of an extraterrestrial craft and extraterrestrial bodies. It's in my gray file, but it's compelling. First of all, we know that Gleason was a staunch believer in extraterrestrial life. He even had a house built in the shape of a saucer with the outbuildings, as he called it, the mothership, and the outbuildings were around, and he called them the scout ship. So, and when Gleason died, he had a tremendous library on UFOs and the paranormal, which he donated to the University of Miami. And you have to believe that Gleason, as close as he was to Nixon, and they were very close, felt that the government should come clean with what they knew, and you have to believe that he would have expressed that desire to Nixon, and there's circumstantial evidence that Nixon also had a great interest in the UFO issue. This leads back to the core of the book, and really how the book came about, with what I believe, this goes back to, well, a documentary that I found when I was doing research for my novel called UFOs Past, Present, and Future, that was written and co-produced by a fellow named Robert Emenager. And I've become good friends with Bob. I've even spent the night in his home, his retirement home in Arkansas. And he was brought on board by the committee to reelect the president to do a documentary. And it turned out that the documentary was to be on UFOs. And Emenager was told by the head of the Air Force Audio Visual Department that he would be given 600 feet of film of an actual UFO landing at Holcombe Air Force Base for use in the documentary. So it's my belief, as I go into in the book, that Nixon, like no other president, was possibly on the verge of some sort of UFO disclosure to go along with the what he had accomplished in the area of foreign affairs. People seem to forget that, they look at Nixon as a terrible person now, but they forget that Nixon was extremely popular in his first term. He was reelected by almost a historic landslide, and had great power. And if he could have added UFO disclosure to his list of accomplishments, opening up to China, opening relations with China, detente with the Russians, and so forth, he would have, had it not been for Watergate, he would have gone down as a great president. Now, Bob Emenager told me that the documentary, by the way, which is extremely well done. I heard leading into the program you had Rod Serling on. Rod Serling was the narrator of this documentary. Mm-hmm. Burgess Meredith gave a lecture on it, and did Jose Farrar and Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek, and a number of military personnel were involved in it. So the documentary was supported by the government, and it supported the hypothesis that UFOs were in fact extraterrestrial, and there was no counterpoint. And it was, obviously supported by the government. So perhaps I'm getting off the subject here.
No, that's okay.
A bit, but that Bob Emenager's story in making this documentary is extremely fascinating, and I believe that Nixon was on the way to some level of disclosure before Watergate came in and tore it all down. In fact, Bob told me that they had financing had been arranged from James D. MacArthur, who I think was owned Bankers Life and Casualty in Texas, very, very wealthy. He financed the project, and they hired Rod Serling and all these others, so it was not a low budget deal. And when they were getting ready to start production, Paul Shartle, who was his contact at the Air Force Film Division, said, "I'm sorry, Bob, but we can't let you have that 600 feet of film of the UFO landing. We've gotten too much static from people that don't want it released, and Watergate has entered the picture, and the Nixon administration is backing away from it. Go ahead and make the documentary. We'll open whatever doors we can open for you, and you can even say that show at the end an animated version of a UFO landing at Holcombe," and they were allowed access to Holcombe, and say this is what may happen or what maybe already has happened, and that's exactly what Rod Serling said in the documentary. So that's a long story. It's really a big story, and I covered it in the book, and that's how the book started. Was the background with Bob Emenegger and his story in making the UFOs past, present, and future. But Nixon and Gleason were very close, and you got to believe, you just have to believe that with Nixon's, with Gleason's interest in UFOs and disclosure of what the government knew about UFOs, that if you had that kind of in with the President of the United States and you were a big believer, you got to believe you would be really sort of pounding on your friend to get the government to release at least some information of what they knew.
Exactly. Well, some things I've read about with him is that they said whoever they are, but I mean his wife and some others. I know Gleason was kind of a loner in the scheme of things toward the end of his life, but after he had seen what Nixon had allowed him to see, these extraterrestrial bodies or what have you, whatever it was, it changed his life forever.
That's what his wife said. Said that for a couple of weeks after that, he drank pretty heavily. Well, Gleason was known to drink anyway, but apparently even heavier than usual. That's the story. Whether it's, how much truth is, I've heard stories that Nixon did not go with him, that he actually went to, what Air Force base in Florida Panhandle, MacDill perhaps it was, that he was flown to MacDill and shown these UFO artifacts at Nixon's request, that he and Nixon didn't go to Homestead Air Force Base. I never could figure out why they would have UFO artifacts at Homestead, but so you have to sort of weed out the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, in these stories, and I put them out there for people to make their own judgment and do their own research. And of course, you also asked about Kennedy. Do we want to get into that?
Yeah, we've got a break coming up in a couple minutes, but we get started, then talk on the other side.
The Kennedy chapter was a very difficult chapter for me to write, because first of all, it's rather emotional, and I did not want to get involved in the Kennedy conspiracy theory, of which there must be 100 of them out there, of all shapes and sizes. But there are some facts that exist that tie the Kennedy administration into his desire for the CIA to furnish him all UFO-related documents and information, and his desire for NASA to share all of their information and secrets with the Russians or with the Soviets. And that's based primarily on the fact that he had a concern that UFOs may be detected by Russia or the United States as a missile attack and would cause a response against one or the other, thinking that these UFOs were ballistic missiles. And so that's the back. We know that as a fact. We know that Kennedy wanted to share information with the Russians, and we know that he had requested all UFO information from the CIA. And we can get into the Byrne memo after the break. But if the Byrne memo is legitimate, and I underline if 100 times, if it's legitimate, it's one of the most chilling things in all of ufology.
We'll take a quick break, and on the other side, we'll talk about it. Our guest tonight, Larry Holcombe. It's an honor to have him on the show. You're listening to Fringe Radio. Check us out on the web at fringeradioshow.com. Stick around. We've got one final segment left. Larry, the time goes too quick. It seems like just minutes. We could spend hours and days on this subject.
You're telling me.
So let's talk about the burned up piece of paper, the burned up document and memo.
Very quickly, you need to know that you need to know about, which I'm sure you do, but for the listeners, Dr. Robert Wood and Ryan, his son Ryan Wood. Bob Wood, Dr. Bob Wood, worked for McDonnell Douglas as an senior executive for about 40 years, and he got involved with looking into the UFO issue primarily because McDonnell Douglas said, if it's something to this issue, we want to know about it before Lockheed finds out about it. It's funny, just pure business.
Sure.
And after he retired, Bob became interested in authenticating leaked documents. And he and Ryan have done just a tremendous job of doing that by forensic testing of documents and original documents with watermarks and aging and forensic testing of ink and what have you. But anyway, they received a lot of documents from a fellow, Tim Cooper in California. And a lot of people look at Tim Cooper and say, well, he's not very reliable. Well, whether he is or not, that's another subject. But anyway, one of a group of documents that Tim Cooper received from a unnamed source that said that he worked in CIA under the head of counterintelligence, which was James Jesus Angleton. And Angleton is a historian himself. But anyway, he retrieved some documents that were being burned by the CIA. And these documents have been come to be known as the Byrne memo. And what it says is from the director of CIA, who was listed as MJ1, Majestic 1, to Majestic 1 through 2 through 7, I believe. And the document, and I can't recall it verbatim, but in essence it said, if Lancer continues to ask for these documents from the CIA, we can't allow it to happen. Lancer was Kennedy's code name, a Secret Service code name. And then there were some tab pages with it, which I won't go into, but the last tab page is the most chilling, and it says if Washington continues as they're going and proceeds in the manner they're going, and it's something about cutting off funding and what have you, then the operation must become wet. Well, wet is a code word for assassination, and it really was coined by the KGB, but it's certainly within reason to think that the CIA would use the same code word. The documents have burn marks on them and what have you. The Bob Wood, Dr. Wood, and his son Ryan have researched these in great depth, and they give them their highest level of authenticity on their website. If they are authentic, then they're some of the most explosive documents in history, because it ties the CIA into the Kennedy assassination, and which I have doubts about, but I'm concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
James Jesus Angleton was head of counterintelligence, and if the CIA was involved in it, and this is why it's very difficult for me, Pat, because I don't want to think that my government was capable of doing something like this, and this is why I hesitate with it. But as I told you, these documents are out there, and I couldn't ignore them. I can't write the chapter without putting them in there because they're there. Arthur Lundahl was head of photo interpretation at the CIA, and I think he started the Photo Interpretation Center. I don't have the exact name in my mind, but anyway, he was the guru in Washington in photo interpretation. He's the one that headed up interpreting the Cuban missile, the missiles in Cuba for the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he was highly thought of by Kennedy and an advisor to Kennedy. Also reported to be a member of MJ-12 was Donald C. Menzel, who was an astronomer, head of the astronomy department at Harvard, I believe. And Menzel was a great UFO debunker, wrote books debunking UFOs. However, his background was found by Stanton Friedman to be that he had very high security clearances and worked closely with the CIA and probably the NSC. And so he was also very close to Kennedy. As a matter of fact, I've got a letter that I got from the Kennedy Library, I believe it was, where Menzel, when Kennedy was in office, wrote a letter to President Kennedy and addressed him as Jack. That's how close they were. I mean, to call a sitting president by their first name in a letter is so Menzel was an advisor to Kennedy, also reported to be part of the MJ-12 group. So you've got this is a complicated story, and I'm trying to wrap it up real quick. But you got Lundahl that I should mention was a great believer in UFOs and the extraterrestrial presence, as was his friend Kelly Johnson at Lockheed Skunk Works. We don't know for sure. I mean, Menzel said, try to debunk on the surface UFOs, but it looks like that he really may have been on the inside. And there are some letters that he told Kennedy when he had the proper security clearance, he could talk to him more about the subject. So you've got all of these bits and pieces and the Byrne memo that go together to make a circumstantial case for the Kennedy assassination to possibly be linked to his deep interest in the UFO subject and sharing the information with the Russians. Now, I end up the chapter by saying, these are the facts, folks. I can't tell you that any of these documents are legitimate. I can tell you who Art Lundahl was and who James Jesus Angleton was, who, by the way, nobody in the CIA really knew about Angleton, and the ones that did cut him a wide berth. But these are the facts. So do your own research and come to your own conclusions. That's all.
You're laying the stuff out there, and again, it's for kind of a new generation, to a little different take. I've got we've got a few minutes left, Larry. I've got a handful of questions. I'd like to go ahead and just shoot them off to you and get your response and get your take. How's that sound?
Shoot.
A couple listeners are very anxious to hear, where do you think our current president, Obama, is on this whole UFO subject?
I think very little. I personally think he's pretty much out of the loop of knowledge. The inside group, the control group, I think makes a determination on what presidents know and what they don't know. Presidents come and go, and they make the determination on how much a president knows and how much he doesn't know and when he needs to know it. Right now, I don't see that Obama is really on the list of need to know. He's probably been briefed to some degree, but I think probably very little.
Okay, fair answer. Another question from our good friend Red on the other side of the pond says, what incident has nudged Larry into writing essentially factual books on UFOs so late on after writing books of nonfiction? Or, I'm sorry, books of fiction.
Because when I went to the first year in 2011 to the Roswell Museum, and in doing research on my book of fiction, I came across this documentary that had been overlooked, that I thought was fascinating and had been overlooked by the mainline ufologists. And I talked to Stan Friedman, to Don Schmidt, Alejandro Rojas, and they all agreed that it had been overlooked. And I asked them about Bob Emmenegger and Stan Friedman, for one, who's been known to punch holes in many false UFO individual or storyteller. Gave Emmenegger a thumbs up, and I contacted Emmenegger, and his story was so fascinating that I said, here's a story that I need to write, and that's how the work of nonfiction began.
Very good. Another question is, this comes from one of our listeners, says, does Larry support William Lyne's claims in his book Aliens of the Pentagon?
I'm not familiar with him. I'm sorry.
Okay, fair question. Again, they're just throwing some stuff.
But I'm making a note. William Lynes.
Lynnes.
Okay, I'm making a note. I will. That's something I missed. I will look into it.
Another question, our good friend Bill in upstate New York writes, it says, Larry, do you think that the U.S. government recovered a craft after the Roswell event, like the incident at Coyami, I believe that's how you pronounce it, Mexico, the Mexican Roswell event?
I think there's been a number of recoveries. That recovery is probably true. I think Aztec has merit, and I think there have probably been other recoveries which don't come to mind right now. I think that Roswell, that there were two craft involved in Roswell. I think there was another crash on the plains of San Augustine, And I think Aztec is probably legitimate, and I think the Mexico crash is probably legitimate.
Yeah.
So, and I think there are probably a number of others.
Yeah, it seems like lately we either these ETs are getting their act together and they're not crashing, or we're able to retrieve stuff quicker.
Well, I think we are able to retrieve. I think that I think the government now has a retrieval network set up around the world that can respond like emergency responders to go to these crash sites and seal them off very quickly, whether it be terrestrial or extraterrestrial.
Right, and keep the general public and keep the media out. Larry, we've got to wrap it up. 2 hours went too quick. Can you tell our listeners, give the name of your book again and a little info when it's going to be out and where they can get it?
It's The President and UFOs, A Secret History from FDR to Obama. It is available now for pre-order at both Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It will be out March 17th. If you pre-order now, you'll be on the list, and you'll save a nice amount of money. They've got it for a nice discount for pre-ordering. And you can go to my website for information at www.LarryHolcombe, LarryHolcombe.com.
Well, the website's got a ton of information on it. Larry, I want to thank you so much. I know it's late where you are, but I want to thank you again for coming back on the program. I'm anxious to get through the whole book. Again, it's kind of a different perspective on things, a little different take on things. Some things rehashed, but definitely new things for a new generation, people that don't know about it all. It pulls it all together. I want to wish you and your family a great holiday season coming up. And again, it's been an honor to have you on the show as always, and I want to get you back on again down the road.
Well, Pat, I'd love to come back, and when the book comes out, maybe we'll have something else to discuss. And it's been a joy. You do a great job. I enjoy the interview and enjoy talking with you.
Well, I enjoy talking with you too, my friend. Take care, be safe, and we'll stay in touch.
Have a good holiday.
You too. Take care, Larry. Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.